drink of water. Check. Perfect. And got it. I am officially recording. So, hey everybody. Here is a little tiny kind of presentation that helps get us in the mindset of advanced photo editing. When I sent this initially over to Shirley, I started off with that idea of when someone asks if that photo is edited, and the answer should be yes, because we'll kind of dive into that now. If you're really trying to get anywhere in your photography, you should never let the camera make all the decisions, and so your photo should be edited. Okay, so let's talk a little bit of the philosophy which I kind of run by, and then you can kind of tie into the world. So, but when photography became kind of a method of recording the world, it always had this step between capture and final product. And in the good old days, whatever you want to call it, that would be your developmental phase. And so a lot of your early professional photographers and even hobbyists would have that time frame where after they took the photo and then they would develop the image themselves, and they could then do things like correct, add, subtract, change brightness and other exposure settings to get it to where they felt like their image wanted to go. And so that really actually is the foundational work of photography, is this idea of you capture a moment or you take a moment or whatever. If you have a philosophical hatred towards this idea of taking something from nature, you created some image. That image was never quite final until it was a final product, and there was always a phase in between capture and final to get to the image. And so this is, let's take it back to Ansel Adams. So right is before and left is after. And so you can see here that Ansel Adams, dramatically darkened the sky. So you'd have this really prominent highlight line that's coming down from the very top of the screen or top of the image that makes up the edge of Half Dome. And the contrast was dramatically increased there on the rock face. And so then you got this bright and dynamic image. And if people did what I hear constantly now at art shows, oh, my photos aren't edited, and then somehow that raises their photography to this next level of grandeur. All of us are standing on the shoulders of giants, and these giants all created their work through a lot of editing and working and tweaking their photos until they got it to what they wanted. And so I am not a fan of this idea where editing is a dirty word or a bad word. And mind you, I understand that there's a level of editing that I don't do. I'm not one for doing, changing skies completely or removing, there's some aspect of this photo I hate. I'm just going to just throw a fictional rock there and just take it out. I'm not one for that. But I understand that photography is built on this idea that you're creating art, and your final product should be something that comes from you, not from what the camera created. So where did photo editing go? How come it died? How did it get so bad? I think in some ways it goes back to the 35 millimeter film. It was introduced in the 1913, became popular in 1936. And then by the 1960s, it became more mainstream. And at that time, hobbyist professionals still developed their own film. I imagine some of you in high school developed your own film. I even did some of that in high school. But a majority of us, and I remember growing up this before digital cameras were a thing, we would go out and buy our little point and shoot cameras or our Polaroids, and we would take a photo and you would get exactly what the camera guy gave you. But that art of photo editing kind of got lost during this time frame where we sent our images off to be developed by a developer rather than the photographer working on their own image. And so we outsourced development to somebody else. And as a kind of a culture, we lost photo editing in both the photography culture and in mainstream culture. And so Photoshop introduced back this digital darkroom again. And, because the general public lacks this mindset and assumes that no edit is the real deal, that became the kind of the dogma that persists today, that I deal with probably every single art show I've ever done in the past 5 years. One person comes up to me, shows me a photo that is usually blown out in highlights where you can't see chunks of it, or the ground is gone, you can't see it. And they look at me and say, this is the real deal. And this photo is no editing here. And I'm like, oh, cool. You showed me a really mediocre photo. That has been the standard of my existence now for 5 years doing art shows, because the general dogma of the public has essentially assumed that all Photoshop is bad. But in all reality, Photoshop brings us back to our roots of photo editing and getting us back to the capture and create, and bringing the artist back into the camera work instead of having the camera be the artist. So my thoughts: never let a robot do a human's job. You are the human, you are the creator, not the camera. Camera is only the tool. So that's where my philosophy comes from, this whole photo editing, is that your camera is going to help line you up with the tools that you need in order to create these photos. And so let's get to some photo editing. Okay, so let me stop this. You guys can unmute if you have questions. And then let's get over to, here we go.
This is Shirley. I'll make one comment about you have people coming up to you with their photos on their phones and whatever. All I can say is hallelujah to that. I get the same thing when I sit at the gallery or other places where I'm showing my work too.
Yes. And it is a constant thing.
Yeah.
I deal with day in and day out.
Yeah.
Where I talk about showing my photos and people come up to me and say, this right here is a real photo. And I'm like, you let the camera make the decisions for you, and your photo looks like it.
So that's right. What I was going to say. We all should have, somebody needs to come up with a clever, but not really horribly rude comment that is just a standard comment for all these people that come up and say that, because I think we've all had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll let you guys do that.
We'll work on that.
We can discuss it on the Facebook page. Okay, so I assume most of you are familiar. Can everyone see my Lightroom screen here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to walk through two different types of photos tonight. One is, I would call, more of a basic photo, and one that's going to be far more advanced. This is going to be kind of a basic photo when it comes to photo editing, and we're going to help see if we can pull this thing together. So when it comes to taking the photo, one thing you have to remember in your field work, you got to capture all the information necessary in order to create a good photo. And if you don't have your fill technique down, your Photoshop and your Lightroom editing gets more difficult. So generally how I do this, so this would be, if you look at the top of your camera and you have your little exposure lines that tell you how much you're exposed over or under, and then what's your middle of the ground exposure. This is my middle of the ground exposure. And so when I took
the outlaw music fest thing that we have.
Huh? Okay. So this is my middle of the ground exposure. And so when I took this photo, I realized I was going to lose details up here in this far left, even though the camera says I have it there. I'm going to lose some details over here. And so when I took this photo, I took two exposures below. And so now you can see the rainbow a little bit higher up. And then I took an exposure above it and an overly exposed photo. And I'm probably never going to do anything with this. And so this is now my palette that I have to work with, are these images here. And what I would like to do is see how much I can get with a single photo. The idea is when you're editing to bring together kind of an advanced photo and bringing a more complicated photo together, the idea is to try to look into the future and see what type of challenges you're about to run into, and see if you can mitigate those challenges here in Lightroom. So where I usually start with my photo editing, over here on the top right side, we have a color profile. I go to landscape. I like the color arrangement. If you don't want to, you can keep it with Adobe Color. You know, boom, you can keep it there. I prefer the landscape setting. It seems to work nice for Red Rock, and it allows for good colors. There's two areas that I usually reside. You do your global edits over here. And so, you know, I usually add a little bit of contrast, reduce my highlights. And so I can see that the rainbow's there, up my shadows. And then if you're not familiar with what white and black does, these areas change your white point and black point on your photos. And so you can tweak these and it adds contrast. And so now we can see our kind of our before after here. We can take it from left here to right here just by doing a couple quick basic photos or photo edits. And I'm going to add a little bit of dehaze here. And this photo looks like it's working out pretty good. Let me reduce that saturation just a little. And so now this photo is a fairly easy spot to start at. So, but we're going to see if I can actually pull this all together. We're going to use a gradient tool. And we're going to reduce the exposure. Now reduce the highlights. And this isn't bad. This is a fairly easy put together photo that if you wanted to, you could call it good. But let's do some advanced editing here. So I know this is gonna for sure be my ground, what we're seeing here. So, but I'm a little concerned with the sky because the sky looks like it's probably a little bit too bright and doesn't have enough contrast. So let's go over to one stop below exposure. So now I have the exposure that's one down. And so now I have a little bit more detail up here in the sky. And if I wanted to, I could probably tweak and push and pull this photo here to get more detail out of it. But I bet I could do a better job if I just use this one. And I can run by the same kind of premise that I did earlier. Drop my highlights too much, drop my shadows. I like bringing my white point up a little bit, bringing my blacks down, and I can get a little bit more detail. You can see a little bit more of the clouds in here. But I'm also looking at here, I don't know how well you guys can see on your screen. There is grain here within my sky. As we all know, the sky is not naturally grainy. Let me do my final little tweaks I'm going to do on this sky. And so I can kind of see the detail, but I have noise in the sky, and I'm going to lens correction, detail. Here we go. So one way we can help reduce the noise is we first start here with our sharpening panel, and the Photoshop or Lightroom gives an automatic basic sharpening setting. But what you can do is you hold this, you look at the masking tool here. And what you can do, you press Alt. Let me zoom out so you can see what's going on here. When you press Alt and then click on your masking slider, everything turns white, but as you slide it over, it'll start redoing or changing the image. So you start seeing on the ground is everything that's white, and that's where the sharpening is being applied. And everything that's in black is where the sharpening is not being applied. And so if I do this and I zoom in again, it's going to be a little bit smoother. And then I can do a little bit more noise reduction. And I zoom in 100%. Now, my sky is looking more smooth. Help this area. So now I have a sky exposure here and a ground exposure here. And we have our car. This truck I watched as he came up the landscape here, but I don't want the car, so we'll just get rid of him. He's doesn't add anything to the photo. He was just happened to be passing by. So it decided to grab from somewhere below, and we can change that, you know, that or this right here. And boom, you know, if we want to, there we go. Car's gone. And we don't have a little distracting element there anymore. So we have our ground shot. Let's make sure our ground shot is looking sharp. So let's zoom in to 100% and go back here to my sharpening tool. I'm going to up my sharpening just a little. There is more of a fine-tuned art to this that I just honestly, as I've done lots and lots of art shows and printed lots and lots of photos, sharpening matters. Sharpening matters doesn't matter that much to the customer, or after a while, most of your photos at 8x12 won't look any different. In fact, it'll down sharpen them when you print the 8x12 size, and you'll only ever notice it when you're hitting 20x30 or bigger. So unless you're printing really big, your sharpening won't make a look a difference to anybody. Honest truth. Okay, so now we have our ground and our sky. Let's bring them together. And if you tell here in the sky, I'm not worried about this car anymore. I don't care about it. It's not in the sky. I don't have to care. It doesn't matter what he's doing now. So now we're going to go like this. So in order to do my final combination of techniques here, we need to bring this photo over to Photoshop. So I'm going to go select my two images. I'm going to right click and I'm going to edit in. And there's two ways I can do this. I can open as layers in Photoshop, or I can open a smart object in Photoshop. This one's easier. This one's slightly harder. This one gives better control. This one takes a little bit more steps to get the control. But so we can show it what it looks like. Let's open in smart object in Photoshop. And I'm going to have to change what is being shared. New share. Let's go over to Photoshop. Share. Okay. Now we're in Photoshop. It's loading. Can you guys see my Photoshop screen?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're in Photoshop. Question number one, why do I have a white background instead of default? Default is good, no problem with it, but it lies to you. White background. Reason why you do a white background when you do photo editing is because in the real world, the white background helps mimic and trick your eyes to picturing what the image will look like as a print. And so I do all my photo editing with a white background. It's not the greatest thing in the world. Sometimes it's bright and annoying. And then when I'm late at night, my eyes are tired, it burns my eyes a little and I get rid of it. But if you're going to be doing photo editing that you ever plan on printing, change your background to white, because when you do it like default, the dark doesn't seem so dark here. But when you go to white, I have a custom, the dark feels really dark here. And you understand when it translates from a digital presentation to a physical presentation, if it's dark here, it will be dark in the print. Okay, so we have our sky and our ground, and we need to bring them together. The easy way to do this is we have our little selector tool up here. We click on our layer, hold shift, drag it over to the layer we want it to go in, drop it in. So now we have on our right here, we have our layers. We have our top layer and our bottom layer, reveal. So now we're in the world of, this is a fairly basic photo edit. And let's introduce everybody to masks. This is a mask right over here in the bottom right corner. We have add vector mask. And this puts this little tiny white box next to your image. To get an idea what vector mask does, what you do, you select it, not the image, that's selecting the image, selecting the box. You hold Control I, and that inverts it, makes it black, and now you see the thing below it. Now you see the top, now you see below. So this in the Photoshop world, this is the white reveals, black conceals. White reveals, black conceals. Okay, I'm going to do this. So what I want to do, I'm going to conceal my layer. It's still visible per se right here. You can, the little eye still open. And this is, let's do a very basic photo edit to get this done. We have a couple ways we can do this. We can try doing the select and do a mask. I don't think it'll go very well. So we're not going to do that one. We'll do a different one to kind of show why that one works and doesn't work. We'll do that. But first, we're going to do a paintbrush. We're going to make it really big. We can up this some. This is our opacity. This makes it so how much goes through. And there's a couple ways you can do this. And you change this to black, to white. And now we start painting back in the sky. And if you look over here, the white is beginning to become kind of, or the black's kind of gray. And some very quick edit. Boom, we exposure blended. So now, within a fairly simple step, we took from this kind of here to a little bit more dramatic shot right here. But I don't like how this made this black. So we're going to do a select. We're going to select along this area. And we're going to push Control H to hide it. And then I'm going to go back to my paintbrush tool. I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to go back over here, make sure I'm selected, make this a little smaller, and paint this back in. And now I have a little bit brighter spot. Okay, before I go any further, does anybody have any questions?
Why smart objects?
Why smart objects? Well, I'm right now on a smart object. Let's say I want to make my sky a little bit darker. I'm going to click on my sky layer, double click, and it has to be opened up in Photoshop as a Lightroom, as a smart object. And now I'm back to my raw editing format. And so now you can see these are all the adjustments I made in Lightroom. And then I want my sky to be a little bit darker. I want to add a little bit more contrast. Push OK. And it'll think. And ta-da.
Ah. Okay, thanks.
Yep. So that's the advantage of smart objects. Now let's introduce a few other things. So I like to do in my photos sometimes. I have my adjustments that I have up here. I do levels a lot. I like levels. It helps add a little contrast to my image. I usually just go down just a little bit and up a little bit. Except I made a mistake here. I may have had let's do that one more time. Levels. I still had a little bit of my mask over here selected, but because it was selected and I had it hidden, when I made another level, it came in as being a selected item over here. So now I can do a little edit just like that, just a quick tweak, adds a little bit of contrast to the photo. Do you see that? Before and after, just a very slight adjustment there. So that's something I do quite a bit with my photos. But now let's get to the advanced stuff. We're going to add a layer. So let's take a look at our photo. Let's say what we want to bring out, what we want to hide. So this spot is dark. We kind of have these nice white cliffs that can add as nice little leading lines back. We have this nice road that adds as a leading line back over here to my rainbow. And I have some cliffs over here I wouldn't mind brightening up. So let's introduce everybody to something called luminosity. In the world of luminosity, let me open up. I'm going to be using TK action panels. There's a bunch of other things that do this very similar thing too. But in the world of luminosity, the idea is it takes your image and it breaks it down into levels of lightness and darkness. And so let's say I click on my brights here. It'll think, and all of a sudden the image looks black and white. It's actually not black and white. What it did do though, when you come over here to your channels, if you're not familiar with what channels are, this is the parts and pieces that make up your photo. You have your red, green, blue. This is kind of all your basic, your red channel, your green channel, and your blue channel. Everything that's highlighted in red here are actual blue pixels, green pixels, red pixels. And when they're combined together, you get your actual image. When you do channels, when you do the luminosity, when you create a luminosity mask, it creates a new channel based on the level of brightness within your photo. And so now you can see whether there's actually different levels of brightness within your photo, and these can be mapped. And the nice thing is, because they can be mapped, they can also be selected. And so if you want to select only the very brightest or kind of even the little bit of the brightness, you can actually go through and choose different levels of brightness to select, or you can do different levels of darkness. Now this is going to be inverted. So everything that's dark here is now going to be selected. So now you see how the world just did that polarized inverted. And so now this is all the dark things that are being selected. Randomly, this goes back to this idea of white is seen, black is not seen. And so the more you go down through this, the less is selected. And so now we can see that right here is the very darkest parts of my photo. And, you know, right over here, somewhere that little speck up there is my very brightest part of my photo. And I have a whole range of brightness in between. So this is where it gets down to the fun stuff of being a visual storyteller and a visual artist with what you're doing. So let's go back over here to my image. I want to bring in and draw people back towards this rainbow over here. I know it's already a bright spot and I'll help draw that, but I want them to kind of wander around the photo and then come back that direction. So let's figure out where I want to select. So I'm going to do my luminosity. Boom. Okay, that's pretty good, but I think I want a little bit more precise. I want just these bright areas selected. I want these cliffs to be selected. I want the road to be selected and kind of these other areas here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to push Control, and if you're a Mac person, Command, and then you're going to click on the channel, and all of a sudden you get the marching ends. So marching ends indicates and lets you know that these have been selected. I'm going to go back over here to my layer. This layer currently has nothing on it. And what you're wanting to do, if you're going to do this, you're going to go to your different type of, what are they called, modes that this layer can be in. And you can do a whole host of different modes. I'm going to do overlay. There's two different modes that are most frequently used with this, overlay and soft light. I like overlay. It adds a little bit better contrast. Soft light is better for haze, if you want to create an ambient haze within your image. And so I don't want these distracting marching ants. And I'm going to do Control H. Now they're invisible. And so now I'm going to do what's in effect dodging and burning. Back in the good old days of photo editing, you would have these little tiny, either a disc with a stick that came off of it, and then you could wave it over parts of your photo to make it lighter or darker, or you would have actual little tiny light, a very dim light that you wave over your photo in certain spots that make lighter or darker. This is the same process or the same idea, just a little bit more advanced. And so now I'm going to paint. So now my paintbrush is working again. I'm still selected, Control H. Now you can see it. No, you can't. I have white is being selected for what I want to have done. If I have 49, it's going to be too bright. I'm going to drop somewhere down over here. And I'm going to gently zoom in a little. And I'm going to add a little bit of brightness to this area. It doesn't look like much. Let's add a little bit along this ridge here. A little bit right here on this ridge. And I'm going to add a little bit here and help add a little bit of contrast. Now we can on and off. You can see how the slight variation in brightness occurred. And let's say I want to bring out this plateau just a little. I need to up that up a little bit more to help this be seen. And now, with some quick basic edits, I took what kind of was looking a little bit flat, and now I added a little bit of contrast through dodging and burning. And say I still want a little bit more right here. That kind of helps lead that direction. Let's do that. Add a little bit to the detail here. And now I've been able to dodge and burn just a little. Any questions?
Wow, that was cool.
So
Don't know if I can do it myself, but it was very interesting to see the slight differences.
Yes, and so that's what it really gets down to. There's a photographer down in Vegas. Why is his name skipping my mind? He's a black guy. Really cool dude. He is a phenomenal photo editor. And his insight that he got from another photographer, he's like, the thing that makes a really good photographer is in the midtones and these little areas that aren't, the super bright and not the super dark, but it's just how to manage these areas in the middle. So now let's do reverse. So let's say I want to make this area a little bit more dramatic. So let's go back to my action panel, do shadows, and you can see that the shadows up here is selected. And you can actually see that there's some detail here, right? The program actually says, oh, there's actually variation in the brightness of that sky here. And so we can change that variation a little. And then with this program allows you to do some tweaking of that. I think I want that. So let's add a little bit of depth and contrast to this. So I'm going to create a new layer. Deselect, make sure I don't have that layer still going on the background. And then now I have my dark mask that I made, right? Still sitting over here. Let's do this. Click on it. Go back over here. Zoom out a little. And we're going to Control H, hide it. And now we're going to go to overlay. And so let's bring some life back over here into these clouds and see if we can add a little bit of contrast. So I'm now switching this to dark. Let's lower this down a little bit again. Always start low, then work your way up, because if you start high, it's going to just look bad. And so remember, I'm on overlay. I still have my mask is selected. And then, did I just do something there? Okay. Now we're going to see if we can add a little bit of contrast to this cloud over here. We can add a little bit of contrast to these clouds over here. And darken that back up a little. I'm a little bit more than I want right here. And that looks like there might be a speck right there, but and so with that, I added more depth to my clouds. I don't know if I particularly love how dark I made it over here. And so if I want to, I can do the erase tool. What I'm using right now, FYI, so if you see that I'm just suddenly switching, I'm using something called a Wacom tablet right now. And the Wacom tablet uses a pen and a kind of a surface area to edit on. And the Wacom tablet allows you to actually do your photo editing as if you were using a pencil. And so it's a little bit more comfortable in the hand if you're doing a lot of fine-tuned stuff. I still actively use the mouse too, but I do a lot of photo editing using the Wacom tablet now. So now let's go back to where we were beforehand.
So when you're
this
brushing,
is where we
when you're brushing, you're actually bringing that elements of that the second photo up.
So
right?
yes. So if you look here on my mask says this is all what's being selected.
Yeah.
And so when I'm up here brushing, the TK should have made a mask that's based off of what's visually seen.
Yeah.
And so when you do this, it'll select kind of these gradients. And so when what you're actually doing now, as I'm actually not affecting these photos at all. I can do whatever the heck I want to these things. They're not being adjusted anymore. We're using different layers. So if you're not familiar with that concept, your layers in Photoshop allow you to work and add stuff to a photo and take stuff away to a photo without actually damaging the photo below. Because if I start actually going down here, let's say I'm not at a smart object, let's rasterize this. Where's my rasterize? I think if I double click.
Don't mess it up for us.
Whatever, it doesn't feel like rastering. I can figure out how to do that another time. But if I had this being a regular image, and I tweaked it here, and I took a pen and I colored on it per se, and and then I saved it, that's baked into the program now. You damage the photo and you can't do anything once you do that. So what you do though is you do these layer masks and you get your base image, what you want to work with, and then you build on top of that. And all of this other stuff can be taken away or added to in order to get your final image. Well, one thing I did notice, if we look right here, it looks like I might have a speck on my screen, on my lens, or on my camera. Oh, that it's actually just something there, but it looks like a speck to me. If you noticed, it's right there. It almost seems like there's a little dark dimple there. I don't like that. So how do I get rid of this thing? Because I could do it a couple ways. I can try to do it in the layer, which might work. But it's probably also going to be down here too. So I have to do it in both layers. If I'm satisfied with what I'm doing now, I can go like this, select these two layers, and I can do Control J, where that'll copy, or I can do Control Alt E. I can now have a merge layer. Now this merge layer looks identical to these two layers below. And so if I turn it on, no difference, right? They're identical. And so now I have a merge layer that I can do things on. You know, let me do a little spot healing tool, right? Let me get this bigger. Spot healing, you know, it'll do something. Oh, deselect, I still have my layer selected. Okay, I can feel like I can tweak this, adjust this, do whatever I want to this. But if I don't like it, I can get rid of it and I still have my base layer that I can work with down below. And so I do a lot of this where I have an image here where I do my merging and I get all my photo the way I want it. And then I create a layer. And now this layer, I can tweak and do things to, and hopefully I won't botch it. And so that gives you an idea of an advanced photo edit. So this was on the grand scheme of advanced photo editing, fairly basic. So would anyone like to see a more advanced photo edit? And let's have actually anyone questions. Let me go back. Let's stop the share. And does anyone have any questions for me right now? Anywhere that you got lost along the way, anywhere that seemed out of the ordinary? Let's take a moment now before I do anything else.
Well, could you do the same thing on Lightroom too? I'm a really big fan of Lightroom. So
the answer is not really no. What Lightroom does well is it does your big global stuff, and then you can even do more advanced things. So let's go back over to Lightroom here. Let me screen share Lightroom.
mm-hmm.
So what Lightroom can do, so let's go back over here to this basic photo here. You can do some of this advanced work here by using brushes.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say I want to add more contrast to the sky here. So let's make this go down to 0. And I want to add contrast to the dark area. So I'm going to, paint and everything. Nothing's being done right now. But if I hold this over, my sky is all selected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now what I can do a range mask, I can do luminance, and I can change what I want. So the way I do this is I select Alt, and then I can start adjusting different areas I want to be affected. Mm-hmm. So this is my darks, and then I can do like this and drop my highlights, or I can, take my shadows, drop my shadows, and it'll start affecting different areas based on brightness. And so that's one way you can do this. Let's get rid of this one. So delete. So you can kind of do it that way. So, take this. I want to do, shadows go low, paint it over here. And you can kind of do some of that. What Photoshop gives you is the ability to do hyper selection on a little better layer or a better level, and then it allows you to bring in multiple photos. You can do photo merging in Lightroom, where you can take, I want to do an HDR image. I have found that when I have done those, the ability to pull things together exposure-wise doesn't seem to work as much, and the computer is doing a whole lot of loophole jumping, and it seems to make more mistakes than if I just did it in Photoshop. Maybe one day Lightroom will get there, but it's not quite there yet.
Okay. So I'm okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Let's go for the more complicated one.
Let's go for the more complicated one. So let's pull in a very complicated photo.
Now, I will say that this may have been, I probably like the second or third time I've been introduced or shown luminosity masks. And for those of you that have never seen it before, each time I learn a little bit more and it makes a little bit more sense.
Okay. Yeah, it's something. The first time I did it, I was a fish out of water. I floundered, and my first photo was like, I did it, and it took me about 4 times as long in order to get it done. So don't feel like you need to be able to master this thing in a blink of an eye, because my first attempt sucked, my second attempt sucked, my third attempt sucked, and my fourth attempt sucked. And by the time my 5th attempt, I was getting there. And so, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of fight, you can get luminosity masks, and so they become a pretty cool tool to use. Okay, let's
I have a question before you go on. Still about luminosity masks. I've had that in the back of my mind forever, and have just not done it. I've done it the other ways, and so I finally, through somebody's recommendation, bought a program, and I can't remember. I think it's just called Luminosity. I don't know, but it sits on my Photoshop, and I haven't even bothered to look at it. So my question is, was there a reason you chose the program you have, and what was the name of it again? And is one program better than the other as far as a an outside app that you use within Photoshop?
I know there's I use TK Action, which is Tony Kuiper, a luminosity panel. The reason why I use it, because it got introduced to me by Sean Bagshaw, a photographer out of the Pacific Northwest. And so he was pretty influential on me in that regard. And so I use that one.
T as in Tom, K as in Karen?
Yeah, T as in Tom, K as in Karen. Tony Kuiper.
Thank you.
It's a TK Action panel.
Okay.
Kuiper is spelled Kuyper.
Yeah. And so he was one of the first that really introduced the world. But there are, I don't know, 4 or 5 of these different panels. And if you want to, instead of buying it, you can get the free trial version. And the free trial version gets you there. It's not great, but it'll get you there. I used the free version for years, and so you just kind of have to blood, sweat, and tear and figure out how you want to do it. I wasn't until really this year that I decided to go the full pro panel, and the pro panel has a couple advantages. Particularly, you can do a little bit more fine-tooth selections than I could do beforehand. So you pick your battles.
Does that run you?
I think it was like $12, $15.
So not a huge investment.
No.
Okay.
I'm just cheap. I've been a college student.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
One question.
It looks like it's $29 now.
$29. Yeah. Okay. 29,
Yeah.
$30.
$30.
Is Photoshop not have native capability to do luminosity masking?
It does. It just takes a lot more work to do it. A lot more work. And so you can, there are some ways to do it. I have done it in times past through blood, sweat, and tears, but I mean, it's a blood, sweat, and tear process. It is not something you wake up every single day and say, you know what? I want to be, make my life miserable for another hour to try to get the right selection. Anything else? Okay, cool. So let's move on. This is an example of a very, very challenging photo edit. So I took this one earlier this year. And once again, I have my different exposures. This is kind of my mid-level, sky, more sky. Above, this is going to be a good ground level, and then my brightest layer. And so I really want this one to be my ground shot. And so I'm going to make sure I do my best to make my ground shot look nice, kind of go through my loops. But one thing I'm going to talk about here, I'm going to start thinking about editing towards the end goal. So my sky here is particularly overexposed. You know, if I click over here, that is all lost information. That cannot be recovered. That cannot be saved. That red blotch here is all lost information. So I can kind of save it with some highlights, but when I go even all my lowest down, it's still just white, right? And you know, I can do some advanced dropping it down, but I've lost it all. It's just white, and I've lost all of that information right there. And so what I'm gonna do now, when I edit this photo, I'm going to try to perceive what this photo will have to look like in the future. And in order to get my ground and my sky to match easy, the way you do that is you take a good ground shot here, or a good sky shot here that has a lot of details that you can almost match over here. They're not that different. And I want this to be my sky area. And so I'm going to edit for the sky, you know, reduce my highlights, do my Adobe color, bring up my shadows, but I'm going to bring up my shadows to try to make this ground match this ground. Because the closer these two different exposures match, even though I'm only caring about the sky over here, the closer these two photos match, the easier it is to bring together. So I'm going to do some more edits, do a little clarity, vibrance. I like this, looks great. I have a nice little starting place. So this is now going to be my sky, but I still have lost information here. And, but I have a pretty good sky to work with here. And so this is going to be my sky. That's going to be my ground. So let's up my ground so my ground's a little bit brighter. These are all, you know, my basic edits I do. And I've dropped my highlights as much as I possibly can here to make this sky match. Where am I at? That's be a good final edit. But this guy and this guy to match as much as I possibly can. Because if I'm too far off and I try to blend these together, it is a nightmare and it doesn't work easily. And it just makes for a whole lot of headache. And so what I do is I bring my ground and my sky, my two exposures, I'm going to eventually blend together as close as I possibly can. And that's where I start. So I also have detail here in this image. And so I'm going to make sure I bring this image in. And so I still have all the detail over here now. I'm going to up the shadows too to kind of help out as well. I haven't lost any detail yet. Dehaze, I always like the dehaze. If you're not familiar with dehaze, go fiddle with it. It's really good. And so now I have essentially three images: a really, really bright spot photo, my overall ground shot or my sky shot, and my ground shot. And so now I'm going to need to bring these all together into Photoshop. So I'm going to, and we're going to do this the other way instead of doing the layers with smart objects. I'm just going to open this up and edit it and open as layers in Photoshop. So I'm going to do that. New share. And let's bring this over to Photoshop. Photoshop. Share. Can you see my Photoshop now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And it's thinking. So I use, by the way, I use a Canon R5, so my photos are kind of big. I'm just going to close this down. I don't need to save this. You don't know what that is. Okay, so we have my 3 different photos. So my ground, my sky, and my more sky, and I always arrange it so my sky here, my top layer is at the very top, my in-between layer is somewhere in the middle, and my bottom layer is here. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can first just do a select tool. Sometimes it works well. And it's not going to do great right here. And so this is going to be, the really basic way is now I've merged them. And now I have a sky and a ground that match, and then I have to spend some time to bring these two together. And then in order to bring back my sky here, I start doing some luminosity masking. So we're going to get a paintbrush. I have a little bit of a problem right down here. We're going to see if I can get that to work. I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time because we're coming up on an hour here. And I am going to just do a quick. Everyone say hi to the cute little 5-year-old who decided to show up and join us, or 6-year-old who's going to show up and join us.
Hi.
Try to close down some background programs here. Computer's beginning to struggle doing this. Hey guys, how'd you go? What's going on? My computer is freezing. Okay, so I can paint this in. I can really spend some time here working with it. Let me go like this, move that up so I can do a quicker version. Right now you can get away with that for right now, right?
Yes, we're fine.
Yep, we can get away with that. So now I need to now save all of this stuff. This stuff is all lost detail, it's lost color, it's lost fun, it's lost vibrance. So we're gonna go over here and we're gonna bring this in. So I am going to first put a mask on it and I'm going to invert it with Control-I. And so you can't see it. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to go back over to my luminosity layer. And I just want the brightest parts of this photo. So I'm going to start here. And I'm going to do as I did beforehand, channels, my channel that I've just created. I'm going to do Control or Command, click on it. It's now selected. Go back over here to the photo, Control-H. And just like that, I now have the brightest parts of this photo selected. I'm going to go kind of light on this. And I'm going to start painting back in some of this lost detail. Now it looks like my selection might be a little bit off here. So let me deselect and let's see if I can just do this a little bit of manual. And by the way, you can have variations within your landscape, variations in brightness across it. Right, I just drew to right here. There's going to be a difference in brightness here and here. But generally speaking, most people, the eye fills in the space here and you will not notice it. People will not notice it. So if you actually go around and spend enough time looking in the Photoshop world, you can actually find these little tiny gradient spots and you do your best to hide them, but your eye will actually fill in a lot of blank here and, you know, kind of match the brightness for you if you haven't been staring at it all day. And it'll kind of, you know, magically blend it all together. So just like this, I used a luminosity mask and we just selected my brightest areas that I wanted. I did just this here. And with that, we did a lot more advanced exposure blend, and we pulled this photo together fairly easily. This wasn't actually particularly challenging to do, so that was a good thing. But just like I was doing before, I'm not done really with this photo. I actually want to bring out, you know, all sorts of things. I really want to make this left side feel like it has more light hitting it. And so I'm going to go back to my luminosity and I'm going to see if I can create a little bit of a layer that selects more of these highlights right here. I'm going to go back over to here, to my rapid mask control, go back over to my layer, but I need to make a new layer, normal, overlay, Control H. And now on white, I'm going to go down. Sometimes it does that. It's a weird glitch in Photoshop. And I can add some brightness over here on this left side to help kind of bring this photo around. And I'm going quick now, so I'm not being as delicate as I normally would. But now it's down to the fine tuning and tweaking. And I'm a little bit over right here. So let me, you know, darken that down just a little. And then, you know, boom, we have a quick photo that we pulled together using some advanced Photoshop. And so let's pause that here. It's 7:05. Let's start with questions and concerns. And then why I actually probably wouldn't normally actually just do a select all the way around. And I can talk about that for a minute and then just do this like this right here. I don't normally do this on this type of photo right off the bat. And I have some good reasons why, and we'll talk about it after we answer a few questions. Anything?
I think you've given us a very good overview of the power.
Okay.
And I
So
always felt the power is in the software, and you've really
Yes.
showed that us tonight. And then, you know, going into the luminosity masks is very interesting to see.
So there's a reason why I actually don't normally do this type of select where I just, you know, select the sky and then just do a quick layer mask. There's a good reason why I don't always do it. When you zoom in, Photoshop has a tendency to cut corners around edges here. And you see this little halo. And it becomes really prominent on these jaggedy edges. And if you have like a tree, you can see it really prominent right here, the halos that go around. Bushes right here. Oh, here's a good example. So Photoshop selected the top part of this bush, but not the bottom part of this bush. And you can see the same thing right here. So right here, Photoshop selected all the way around here, didn't touch that. Selected all the way up here, didn't touch that. And so it's a good way to start, but Photoshop has a tendency to do things like that. And so if you're just selecting everything and then just doing a quick, you know, select, boop, 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 boop. Oh, Control D, select, you know, come up here, layer mask, boom. It'll do that, and it does a fine job at it, but it has a tendency to cut corners on trees and other things like that. And so really what it comes down to is you start getting back into your luminosity mask, and you're trying to select maybe the darks up here. And then you're trying to really cut down as much of this ground as possible. And then so what you would do, you would, maybe I'll modify this a little bit more. You know, maybe this is modify how I want to do it. And I'm going to, do my control, bring it over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my selection tool, and then you push Alt, it does a reverse. So in Photoshop, generally speaking, Alt makes opposite. And so Photoshop will start with your plus sign for coloring or selecting or whatever. Well, the Alt will usually reverse. And then I will come through and do some of this, remove some of this other stuff off the bottom. And I'll try to remove some of these bottom layers here. And so then I have a little bit more advanced selection up top. I do a lot of that depending on what's going on. Or I just fight tooth and nail with the luminosity masking. Luminosity masking makes some aspects easier, other things harder. But it's a very useful tool to have to use when it comes around. Like this is definitely a really good one for luminosity, because then you can really select these little fine details in here, and you can really get good contrast in the clouds. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, go back over here, and ask if anybody has any questions to kind of cap this off. I'm going to, because 7:10, we've been on for an hour.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming here and joining me. So that's kind of how I do my workflow and doing for my advanced photo editing. So I do a lot of luminosity masking, and then I do luminosity plus like a regular layer, and then I go through and use your black and white, or you can even use other colors too, to help kind of paint in and add effect and detail and light and dark into your photo, to help, bring something alive.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm looking at TK Photos webpage, and yeah, their TK7 panel for Photoshop is $29. They have a masterclass video that's $55. So it is fairly reasonable. And then they've got some package deals. If you buy the panel plus the video guide, you can, knock some money off. And then it looks like right now, just for goodwill, he's giving 25% of all sales after paying affiliates and PayPal fees, donating it to people that are having problems with COVID, wildfires, hurricanes, and floods. Looks like he's based out of Arizona.
Yeah, he's based out of Arizona, but the guy who does the videos for all of his master classes is Sean Bagshaw, based out of the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, yeah, that's the guy. So I will put the link to this on the meetup site as a comment so that people can take a look at it. But like Karen said, she's had them, but she hasn't played with them. And it is a fairly reasonable price to get into something like this. And they do have some free ones too. So free panel. The version 6 looks like it's free. So
yeah, how many people are actually here just use Lightroom, and how many people here use Photoshop at all? Or are most people here just Lightroom users?
Boy, that's a good question.
I like Lightroom.
I
Okay.
use Lightroom mainly, but I do certain things in Photoshop. Replacing skies, blending layers, adding textures and stuff like that. So, and then we've got some on-one users.
Yeah, I see it on one. Yep. Similar concepts though.
Yep, similar concepts. So I have a feeling it's a mix. And then we are starting to get a few people that are dipping their toes, maybe their feet, into Luminar.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Maria likes Luminar.
yeah, it's a good mix.
Yeah, I use that as well, but I also use DxO and Topaz. They all do different things, and it depends on what my images need,
Or what you
Okay.
need.
or what I need. or
Because
what
I got
can learn
DxO
more
also.
easily.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with Photoshop right now. I'm taking a class on it and it's pretty dense.
It is dense. I think one of the things when it comes to Photoshop, the thing that when I first got into it, it always felt like, where the heck do I start? And I think probably the best answer is Lightroom. And then once you bring your photo into Photoshop, just to like help wrap your mind around that, the thing that Photoshop is what makes it king over everything in a lot of ways is its ability for layers. And I know lots of programs now are
Right.
introducing layers, but that was really pioneered by Photoshop. And this idea where you can have a couple different photos or just your different layers. And that is kind of the first hurdle that needs to be overcome in Photoshop, is just the understanding that layers is where you'll spend your whole time, and how to which layer do I want to have selected when I do it.
Right.
And
I have another question also regarding using Lightroom, Photoshop, or Bridge and Camera Raw. The class that I'm taking, and that's Blake Rudis' class. He actually uses Camera Raw and Bridge and doesn't use Lightroom at all. So I was looking at both, probably confusing the heck out of myself, trying to make that conversion. But Bridge doesn't use any import, export. Everything is in real time in your folders. And I was just wondering if you can comment on that. Have you used both, or what are the advantages of using Lightroom over and above Bridge and Camera Raw?
I have not used Bridge. I know of it. I know some photographers do use Bridge. I don't know if there's an advantage to it. It's just another management tool, to my understanding. And I needed to spend some time. I could download the program and spend some time bouncing around on it. But Adobe Lightroom, or the Adobe Camera Raw, is essentially the exact same information that Lightroom gives you.
Right.
So you get the exact same color grading, you get the exact same contrast, highlights, shadows. All of that is essentially identical, but you get rid of the nice, easy interface that Lightroom gives you. It's not more complicated. It's just not nearly as open and easy to see. And so that's built into Photoshop for one good reason, is that with Photoshop you can do everything you want just within Photoshop and not have to worry about any other programs. And so that's the big advantage of just having an Adobe Camera Raw right there in Photoshop, is that you actually don't need Lightroom if you don't want to. I use Lightroom because I like being able to line up my photos and see my different exposures and quickly bounce back and forth between them, and then select the ones I do want and then bring them all together and then do what I need to do in Photoshop.
I was just going to say just what you just said, Nathan. I love Lightroom. That's how I catalog my photos, and I love being able to see all of my various photos. But once I discovered that when I can take it into Photoshop, and I can have all the advantages of RAW, which is basically kind of the same thing that you would use in Lightroom, but when you're in Photoshop, you've got your layers and everything. So I started using most of the sliders in Lightroom, but once I discovered that I could access that in Photoshop, it just seemed much slicker to do most all of my editing. I do a majority of my editing in Photoshop RAW, and then if and use layers, and then if I want something extra, then I'll go into on one or one of the others. But I was just going to make one comment that my problem is I've used Photoshop probably since the first couple of years it was invented, and yet I am totally stuck in that I know none of the shortcuts. I can do everything that you were showing us tonight, Nathan, but when you're saying, okay, do Alt X Z Y A, I do everything the hard way. If I want to put a layer, add a layer, I'll put up one photo, I'll do select, and then I'll go to copy, and then I'll go to paste. And I know that I need to get off of that hump where I am and start doing things much more efficiently in Photoshop than I've done forever. I don't know if anybody else has that issue or not, just not taking the time to learn all of the shortcuts.
I don't know all the shortcuts either, but I know important ones. And so these are like, if you want to, I can do a quick run through the most important ones I use
Yes, that would be great.
constantly.
That'd be great, yes.
So,
Yes.
so your
Talk
the
slowly.
most,
We're
the
writing.
most,
Slowly.
yeah, the most important one is your Control Z or Command Z. That is go backwards. That will be the one you use all day, all night. You know, then that's the same. Funny enough, that's a universal go back one step. It'll work in both Lightroom. It'll also work on the internet. It will work pretty much anywhere in your life. So if you don't know that yet, Command or Control Z will take you back one step. And so if you accidentally delete something, Control Z, and you're back to where you started.
Gotcha. It's a good one.
So Control Z is what I use. Alt, that key itself. When you select certain things, it'll show you the selection, and it will also do the inverse. So usually what it does, it shows you the opposite of what's being revealed.
Wait, now
That's
say that
generally
one
how-
again.
Just the Alt key.
Oh, okay.
That's on the
So-
PC. What is it on the Mac?
I think it's Alt there too, isn't it? Here, Shirley,
There's
you use Mac.
no- Is
Yeah.
it either Control, Option, or Command?
I think it's Option.
I think it's option.
Okay.
There's a little alt up in the corner of the, at least on my Mac keyboard. The Option key has a little alt up in the corner to
Yes.
remind me.
Oh, you're right. It does. I never noticed that before.
Yep.
Thank you.
So when so let's say you're looking at a layer with a mask on it and you want to see what you selected, you push Alt and then you hold Alt and then click on the mask and then it'll show you what the mask is. And it'll be a black and white plus the gradient in between. So super useful if you're trying to figure out where you need to go next. And then if you're trying to deselect something, you hold Alt and that'll make it so your selection is the opposite. Command or Control J is to copy. I use that one a lot. So if I have a layer, let's say I have a layer that I want to do something directly with the sky and something I want to do directly with the ground. And so I'm going to copy that layer. So Command or Control J, and now I have two copies. And then if I want to merge a bunch of different layers, I do Control Alt E, and that will make a copy and merge those. And those are the ones I use all the time. Anything outside of that, I don't use.
What was the last one you just did? Command, Control?
Control Alt E.
E.
What
that
did that
will-
do?
And so when you select like 2 or 3 layers, it'll copy those layers and then merge them into a new layer.
Great. Multiple layers.
What about plus and minus for zooming in and out?
Oh yeah, yes, I use plus
Yeah.
and minus for zooming.
Yeah.
I Control plus, Control minus, and then I stopped using the brackets. If just below your plus and minuses is your brackets to increase and decrease size of your brushes.
Yeah.
I have a little spinny wheel now, so I don't.
I think you could probably Google on Photoshop shortcut
Yeah.
cheat sheets
Yeah.
and see a whole
Yeah.
bunch of graphics for that.
Yeah,
I've heard though that once you learn shortcuts, your productivity just goes through the roof, as well as using a tablet.
yeah. You know what? The tablet, I didn't have a tablet until last year, and so for 3 years I did it all with just with the mouse. 4 years I did it with the mouse. The mouse, what you get really good with when you do it with just the mouse is you go through and you get really used to this idea of really tiny fine adjustments with the click, because the click will always be 100%. The brush doesn't work like that. And so I think in some ways there's a nice advantage to doing the mouse because you get really used to that. But once you go to the brush, the advantage with the brush comes in when you're trying to gradually blend things in. And it helps particularly when you're trying to work with lights and darks and shadows and trying to like really work with those areas because it makes a better feathered adjustment. And your hand is better at moving a pencil around than your mouse is. The mouse is just not nearly as responsive as 70 years or 40 years or 30 years of using a pencil. So
Mhm.
Good point. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now, but we can still continue discussion.